Michigan's newest U.S. Senator, Elissa Slotkin. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and welcome back to Jackson.
Happy to be here. It's a beautiful day.
Yeah,
beautiful day.
Well, we made it that way.
You arranged everything. Thank you for doing that. It was perfect.
Just for you. So you're in the state, kind of, I guess, conducting a little bit of a listening tour.
Yeah. We were in Detroit yesterday, Port Huron before that. We'll be in Lansing tomorrow and Okemos. And just getting out. You know, I've been a senator for 100 days. Or
100 days.
105 days, something like that. This is the longest stretch of time they've given us to come back to our home states. So it's good to be back. It's good to be back just as spring is really starting. And just to hear from people and what's keeping them up at night.
Well, you've actually launched yourself, or been launched onto the national stage right out of the chute. You were selected to deliver the the Democratic response to President Trump's address to joint session of Congress.
Yep.
You've been featured in a lot of media appearances. You were profiled in Vanity Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, they followed you around.
They did. They followed me around. They came to my farm in Holly. You know, it's a different thing to just go from the House to the Senate. And I think most people right now are frustrated with the tone of things and just want kind of team normal. So I'm just trying to play for team normal.
Well, that seems to be it. There's so many issues that are in people's minds, and we've seen at some town halls elsewhere, particularly Republican town halls, where people have really turned out to talk about things really that are affecting them or bothering them. Yeah. And this morning you had a session with Jackson small business leaders, and I was kind of surprised. I was anticipating there'd be a lot of questions about, you know, Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio and the DEI, but everything was on the pocketbook. How it's going to affect me, my family, things like the tariffs, cuts anticipated on Medicaid, Medicare, the VA, Social Security, and that pretty much was the whole meeting.
Yeah, that's been my experience. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of angst and concern about democracy issues or cultural issues, but the average Michigander, I think, thinks about their pocketbook and their kids, right? So if you can, you know, talk about an issue that relates back to those two things, you're talking their language. And I think what you heard today was just a bunch of leaders and business owners who were just trying to figure out, like, how do I plan in this environment? Do I make decisions differently? And I think we need to hear that, right? There's a level of uncertainty that I haven't personally heard since COVID, right? Business owners being like, I was about to hire more people. Should I cancel that? Obviously, when Washington sneezes, Michigan gets a cold. We feel the effects of those things, but people really just want to know what's going to happen to my kids' childcare. You know, we heard about that. What's going to happen to home visitor coverage or my Social Security? So there's a lot of stress in the system because a lot of people care about those programs.
So we've heard from the administration and from leading Republicans, we're not going to cut Medicare and Medicaid or Social Security or veterans benefits, but they all will be affected by cuts to the infrastructure, the people answering the phones. Yeah,
I think that's the thing that is maybe being missed right now, and I hear this from a lot of veterans in particular, right? There's on the one hand, people are saying, I'm not going to cut any services to veterans, and that's a pretty nonpartisan, I hope, issue, right? Service to veterans who served this country and earned those benefits. But then on the other side, there's a proposal to cut 70 or 80,000 people who work at the VA. So I've had veterans, I've done these veteran town halls, and I've had veterans come up to me and say, well, look, you may not be cutting my health care, but if I can't get approval from someone on the phone to get that knee surgery, and I have to wait 2 years to find out if I can have the surgery, I'm in pain for 2 years, you know, then you're also cutting off my access to health care. So I think people just need to maybe take a step back and think it's not just about the doctor who's in front of you or the nurse. It's about the system that makes things move and hum.
And here in Michigan, we do have a lot of federal employees that live here In fact, there was one this morning. It sounds like she was being let go from the Department of Defense.
Yeah, or she had taken a buyout. I couldn't quite tell, but she had been 20 years in the Department of Defense and did logistics on a bunch of Army equipment. I think I was a federal government employee. I was a CIA officer and a Pentagon official. I did 3 tours in Iraq alongside the military. So I've served around national security people my whole life. And I think people have no idea sometimes what people are doing in the dead of night to keep them safe so that we don't get attacked. We don't have bombs going off in our cities. So many countries don't live the way we live. And that's not by accident. It's because someone's working on countering that terrorist threat or that cyber attack.
And that's what we're hoping. I think a lot of people are nervous with what we're hearing out of Washington, particularly the Pentagon and our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. It sounds like maybe even the Trump administration is starting to sour a little bit on the Secretary.
Well, there's definitely been a bunch of, balls fumbled in the first month that he's been in, or 5 weeks or whatever it is. And I think, the truth is, again, military issues, our veterans, they just shouldn't be partisan issues. We should have someone who understands the institution and is going to respect it and lead by example. And so I think what was hard for me with all of these stories that have come out about putting military details, operational details on unclassified, cell phones, is, if I had done that as a young CIA officer, or if a young lieutenant did that and it got caught, oh my gosh, they'd remove you from the workplace immediately. They'd open an investigation on you. You could, serve time if you really endangered those military folks in those operations. And instead of just owning it and kind of manning up and saying, look, I made a mistake, I'm the Secretary of Defense, I should be held to a higher standard, or at least the same standards, he didn't. He went the other way. And the military is a place that really teaches accountability from the minute you join. And so he's just refusing to take accountability for what he's done, and it's becoming a distraction. We're talking about this instead of talking about, things that are happening, war zone issues that are happening that, people are risking life and limb.
Do you think he's going to last in that position?
I really don't know. I think President Trump fired a lot of people in his first term. He had no shyness about firing, and he seems reluctant to do it now. And I just think, look, you don't want your Secretary of Defense being the story. You want what the military is doing successfully to thwart attacks. That's the story. So let's move on from him. I've called for him to resign, but President Trump should exercise that decisive action we know him for.
Yeah, I heard you tell Jake Tapper last night that if he had just apologized and said, hey, I screwed up, let's move on, we would have.
I think we wouldn't be talking about it today on your show in the middle of Jackson, Michigan, very far from DC. So yeah, I think he's become a full-on distraction.
Well, let's talk about what you did hear about this morning. You mentioned that Michigan is the state that is going to be affected the most, the first, the fastest on tariffs. How so?
So if you think about our economy, the big, muscle movements in our economy are manufacturing. That's our real bread and butter, but also farming, agriculture. People don't realize how much of that is part of our economy. So you take a state like Michigan that's next to Canada, border state. We have so much back and forth. I mean, just every single day, our trucks are going back and forth, our businessmen, our nurses and doctors, that when you say, well, now we're going to put up a big old sort of imaginary wall and put tariffs up against Canada, declare them a national security threat, which is what the president did, it changes a lot of our ability to manufacture. Suddenly a car part can be double the price. Now the price of a car overall is going up. The biggest market for our farmers is Canada. That's where they sell the bulk of their food to. And suddenly now we're getting retaliatory tariffs. So you can start to see how we're going to be, we are impacted foremost. Not to mention the fact that, our hospitals in Detroit can't survive without those nurses coming over every day from Canada. So we got a lot of dependencies, and I just don't believe in treating Canada like they're China. Like, let's have a conversation about China. I'm willing to have a real tough conversation about that and tariffs. But Canada, we have scratchiness every now and again, but we work together as allies, and those tariffs are going to really hurt us.
Yeah, I think here at Henry Ford Jackson, we do have medical personnel coming over from
Wow.
Windsor. They were during the pandemic, and
Yeah,
I know.
amazing.
Yeah. So China, that's the country that we do have the highest tariff
Oh, yeah.
on. And you actually, your very first bill you introduced earlier this month that deals specifically with Chinese vehicle imports.
Yep.
You don't want them here.
No. I don't want them to ever be able to sell a Chinese vehicle inside the United States. Let me tell you why. So those Chinese vehicles, the biggest company is called BYD. They basically, looks to me like they stole a lot of the visuals from a Tesla, and then the Chinese government just subsidizes it. So it's a $10,000 Tesla. But it's a connected vehicle. It's one of our modern vehicles that collects 3D video, full motion video, mapping and sensors, geolocation of individual drivers, a huge data package, and they send that all back to China. So if we let those vehicles in here, number one, it's going to certainly compete with our car companies. We don't make a $10,000 car. No one does that. Only countries that are subsidizing are going to get a car like that. But then number two, it's like a driving intelligence collection organization on our military bases, taking all that video and mapping of our infrastructure sites. Specific leaders, American leaders, right? I think about that. Like they'll know where I am and where I'm going. And I just don't want any of that all going back to China. American companies collect a lot of the same data, but they're subject to American law. If they misuse it, we can go after them in court, not the Chinese. So they sold their first vehicle in Europe in 2021. It's this little Tesla looking thing. And now they have like 28% market share. It just went booming.
Already?
No, in Europe.
Oh, in Europe.
And now they're one of the fastest growing cars bought in Mexico. And they're buying car plants in Mexico. So we can see what they're doing. They want to use Mexico to get into our market. So I just wanted to ban them as a national security issue before they ever set foot here.
And your bill would give the Commerce Department the authority. Why not just say, okay, forget the Commerce Department, we're just...
So you got to have an agency that can enforce that, right? I can't just be like Elissa Slotkin wants to ban them. It has to be an agency. But also I wanted to give them, it's not just the vehicle. Sometimes it's certain parts, Chinese parts, that are being put in American vehicles. I wanted to give the Department of Commerce a broader authority to go after kind of a whole category of pieces in our vehicles or vehicles that collect data on Americans. So it was more expansive than just the car.
Let's talk about education. That was another thing that came up this morning.
Yeah.
What we are seeing in, I think, grants already, where a lot that have been pulled back or canceled have to do with education, either food or actually dollars for certain things like special education. We're seeing that already, money pulled out of Michigan.
Yeah.
We're seeing the education department control what is being taught by the carrot of funding. And we're also seeing the dismantling, apparently, of the education department and things like loans being due and being collected. What are you hearing from educators, particularly when it comes to the dollars there? And you said how much federal funding local education is dependent on. What are you hearing from education leaders?
Yeah, I think the education leaders are way ahead of the average person in the public because they know they're vulnerable because they have so many federal dollars that are paying for things in schools. So any underserved communities, so like a city or our rural areas, depends on Title I federal funding, IDEA funding. It's how we pay for kids who have learning disabilities, who need special programs or accommodations. And you know, that's a growing area that we need in our schools. That's at risk. Our food, free lunch and breakfast, we're concerned about cutting of food stamps. So there is, our educators realize very quickly that if all these proposed cuts that have been in the ether actually happen, then you could have schools that might not be able to keep their doors open. And so what I've asked every leader of every organization to do is just do some scenario planning. Make sure you know how much of your overall budget is federal, and what would you do if that gets cut? Because it's a very serious reality. that a bunch of programs, Medicaid, that a lot of kids are on, is going to get cut. And so we got to, as leaders, plan and just start to understand our vulnerabilities now, because in the next 8 to 10 weeks, we'll start to get a clearer idea of what exactly is going to be cut. And we can't start planning 10 weeks from now. We got to start now.
So accept a reality that something bad is going to happen in certain areas.
Well, I mean, the president has been very open that he's looking for $6 trillion of cuts. That doesn't come out of just one program. You can't just find that in the couch cushions. That's a lot of programs. And for the math to work, it probably means some of our biggest programs, Medicaid and Medicare, are right up there. And so I think we need to be clear-eyed about it and just, as leaders, start planning.
One of the things that I think people have noted about you is, in terms of the Democratic Party, you haven't adopted some of the strategies of people like Bernie Sanders or Jasmine Crockett or AOC, the pounding of the podium and the just talking about Trump. What is the strategy that you are seeing as what the Democrats should be embracing as an opposition party?
Yeah. So I'm someone who did operational planning and war planning in my former life. So I think in terms of plans. And the two things that we just need to be focused on, as for a party that's in opposition, and oftentimes to a lot of things that President Trump is doing, is really two things. Defending democracy, right? I'm sorry, no one is above the law, no one is above the Constitution. If the Supreme Court tells you to do something, the president should do it. There is a separation of powers that comes directly from our Constitution, and we got to enforce that. And the president has to obey the law like everybody else, okay? So we got to defend democracy, defend our elections, all those things. But the second thing we need to do is more related to what you heard this morning, right? We got to bring those kind of non-hardcore political people into the fight. We need to tell people this is what's happening with your kid's school, with your mom's nursing home, with your mom's Social Security. We need you to be with us when we push back on some of these proposed cuts. And that's what happened in Trump's last term. You know, his number one thing that he was going to do was repeal Obamacare, or the ACA. And he came in, he campaigned on it. He came in with a big, year-long plan, and it never happened. Why? Because the average person, not the real political person, but the average Joe just said, wait a minute, you're taking away my health care? Wait a minute, you're not going to cover me because I happen to be born with a pre-existing condition? No, that doesn't sound good. And so we got to do two things at once. Go hardcore to protect our democracy, because nothing's more important and precious. And then number two, educate people so that we bring the middle into the conversation. They're not left out and left with the bad news that their Social Security office has been closed or whatever. We got to bring them into the conversation. And that pushback, Mr. Trump he admits he's a populist. That popular spirit is what will really change the outlook of our country.
He heard from retail CEOs yesterday that the shelves are going to be empty at Target and Walmart. And it seems like that affected him.
It's good. That's good. I think that we're seeing kind of a patchwork of things work, right? Sometimes you have a colleague or a friend who knows the administration and can go quietly on your behalf to get a program unstuck. Sometimes he needs to hear from business leaders. Sometimes public pressure really changes him. We were about to have a Social Security office closed in Saginaw, and the public just said no, and there was articles about it, and local people, Democrats and Republicans, pushed back, and he took it off the list. So, by hook or by crook.
Well, you've got a lot of major committee assignments: Armed Forces, Homeland Security, Governmental Affairs, Agriculture, Nutrition, Veterans Affairs, and more. So a lot of those things, they're actually really front and center, day in and day out. And right now, well, today, Vice President J.D. Vance is calling on Ukraine to accept the peace proposals that are more closely in line with what Russia wants.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the U.S. is saying, take it or leave it. If you guys don't make peace and on these terms, we're done. What do you think?
Well, look, I mean, the Ukrainians are fighting for their country. And imagine if another country came and invaded the United States, we would defend it with everything we had. And if another country just came and entered the picture and said, let that invading country just have, the East Coast or the South of the United States or the West Coast, we would take issue with that too. We would say, no way, you don't get to illegally invade a democracy and just take the land you take. So I think that they're trying to end things very quickly, but that won't be a durable peace. The Ukrainians will not accept that. And I don't believe the Russians for 1 minute are just gonna stop at that line and not go further. They tried to invade the whole thing. And they only got a piece of it. So we want a durable peace, not just a temporary peace.
Yeah, I think the terms include letting Crimea go to Russia,
Right.
Never being in NATO ever.
Right.
One of the things also that we're seeing is the changes in who's running the government and making decisions about where dollars are spent, where dollars are cut, and that's Elon Musk. What is the feeling that Elon Musk is near the end of his time in Washington?
Well, I think he's near the end of his time in Washington because he's made a lot of controversial decisions, and a lot of people, especially a lot of Trump voters I know, they still have a lot of grace for President Trump, but not so much for Elon Musk. I think they have different approval ratings. I think Mr. Musk's companies are having trouble right now. Tesla's having trouble. But I don't know how long he planned on being as the head of Doge. But it sounds like about 100 days is how much he lasted, and I think everyone feels okay about that.
Yeah, I think he's seeing that. Well, I maybe I better go, take care of my car company.
Companies.
And the opponent that you had as you ran for Senate, Mike Rogers, did you see this week? He's thrown his hat in the ring to run for a Gary Peters seat next year.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I can't say I wish him luck. I can't say that. But what I would hope for Michigan is that we can conduct a political competition like adults. I think the average person wants it. It's just the people on the far poles of our political life who are the loudest, who want to be threatening each other and, screaming at each other's face. In Michigan, we always, when I was growing up, we were a place where I could have a Republican dad and a Democratic mom, and that was not the source of, a family argument my entire life. We were more likely to fight over sports than we were over politics. And I think the average Michigander just wants it to be clean. So I call for certainly a clean fight.
Well, we appreciate you giving your time and attention to Jackson and to us and our viewers today. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
U.S. Senator Elissa Slotkin.